Welcome to part 4 of the Beat Sequencer Unity tutorial by PeerPlay. In this first exclusive part we are going to create a custom property drawer. Thank you for your support as a patron. I hope that this tutorial will help you become a better programmer and designer in Unity. In this part we are going to start creating the Beat Sequencer class. The goal is to create a tool in which we can easily create a pattern, and for that we are going to script a custom property drawer. In this property drawer we'll show buttons in a row that we can tick on or off. Well, let's go to the folder scripts and we're going to create a new folder and we'll call this sequencer. Now open up the sequencer folder and we're going to create a new C# script and we'll call this the Beat Sequencer. Let's open up that script. Now we're going to create a property attribute. Now what is a property attribute? Let me show this with an example of a float. I'll call this test. Now here we've got our float test and that will appear in the inspector if we create an empty game object. Let's put the beat sequencer on it and you can see the test float here. Now we can add an attribute to this float by typing these, and we can say, for example, range between 0 and 1. Now this is an attribute of a range value, and that will change the inspector to a range float value. Now this is built in, but we can create our own attribute. And we're going to create an attribute that is used on a string. So let's create a new script, create C# script, and we're going to call this beat pattern. Now let's open up the beat pattern script. Now first of all, we don't need to use all of these libraries, so we're just going to use the system library and the Unity engine library. Also, we're not going to inherit from monobehavior, but we're going to inherit from property attribute. So let's type that, property attribute. And above the class, we're going to tell it that we're going to use the attributes. And in between here, we're going to say attribute targets dot field. Now let's look at the beat sequencer class again at the range, because this range attribute is having two variables. This is a min and a max. And we are going to script some of these variables that we can use. Let's delete the void update and the void start. Now I'm creating two variables to set for the beat pattern. The length of the pattern, for example 32 beats, and the beat interval. So that if we set the beat interval to 8, we can use this value to color our buttons in the inspector to see when a full beat appears in the pattern. And for this class we're going to create a read-only integer. So public read-only integer, and we'll call this the pattern length. And the other variable we want is another read-only integer, and we'll call this the beat interval. Now to use this we need to instantiate our own class, so create a public beat pattern, and this will require an integer, and we're going to use the pattern length, and this requires an integer, and this is called the beat interval. Now we're going to say that this dot pattern length is becoming the pattern length, and this dot beat interval is becoming the beat interval. And that's it for this script. So let's save this script and go back to Unity. Let's rename this game object to Beat Sequencer. Now when we go to the Beat Sequencer class, we can use our beat pattern. So we can type beat pattern, and when we open up this one, we can see the pattern length and the beat interval. So let's say a pattern length of 32 and a beat interval of 8. Close that one off. Now if we use this and save it, The attribute won't do anything, and that's because we haven't created an editor for the beat pattern. So we need to create that. And to create an editor for the inspector, we always need to put these scripts inside a folder called editor. So let's create another folder and we'll call this editor. And inside the editor folder, we're going to create a new script and we'll call this the beat pattern drawer. And let's open up that script. And again, we don't need all of these dependencies, so let's remove these. And we want to use Unity Engine, and we're also going to use the Unity editor. Now again, we're not going to inherit from the mono behavior, but we're going to inherit from property drawer. And above this class, we're going to say that this is a custom property drawer and it's the type of a beat pattern. So let's say custom property drawer, type of a beat pattern. Now this editor script is linked to the beat pattern. Let's remove the start and the update. Put this on a new line. Now we're going to override the onGUI. So let's create a public override void onGUI. Now as soon as I type the open parentheses, it automatically made the rect position, serialized property, and GUI content label. So the rect position is containing all of the information of the position on the inspector. So if I type position, I can get all the things like left, max, min, the top, its x coordinate and its y coordinate. Now the property contains all the information of the property itself. So if I type property, you can get here all the values of the property itself. And the GUI content label contains all of the labels of the elements. So if you have an array, you might notice that in Unity it says element 0, element 1, element 2, and that is what the GUI content label holds. Well, let's first remove the base.onGUI because we don't need that. And as I said before, we are going to use a string for displaying and creating our pattern. We will make a string of a certain length containing ones and zeros and convert them in C# into booleans. For now, the first thing we are checking is if the type of the property is a string. So let's create an if statement and we'll use the property and we're going to get the property type. And we're going to say if this is equal to serialized property type dot string. So if it is a string, then we're going to do something, and if it's not a string, we're going to display something else. Let's start by writing out what happens when the type is not a string. Because when we go over to the beat sequencer, we can see that we implemented here the beat pattern on a float. So what we want is to give a warning that we can only use this on a string. So for this, we're going to create a label. And we're going to set the color of the label to green. So let's first say GUI.color is color.green. Now to set the position of a label, we always need to create a rect first. So let's create a rect and we'll call this label rect. And it's going to be a new rect. And here we have to give the position and the size. So the position is going to be from this position. So we'll get position.x, position.y. Now we need to get the length of our label. I'll set that to 300 pixels and a height of 20 pixels. Now let's create the label. So we'll type GUI.label. Now here we need to get the rect position, so we created the rect already. So let's say label rect. And this is the content, and we can type a string here. And we'll say this attribute only works with strings. Let's save this and go back to Unity to see if we can see the label. So let's go to the beat sequencer And here we see our string. Now if I change this to a string, we should not see the label anymore. We actually see nothing because we have written nothing in the if statement for when it's a label. So that works so far. Now for our pattern, we're going to use a string array. So in our beat sequencer, let's change the public string to a string array. And let's change the name to pattern. Let's save this and go back to Unity. Now because this is an array, we can see the pattern here and we can set a size. But once we set a size of, let's say, 4, we won't see anything. And normally it would say element 0, element 1, element 2, element 3. But we haven't written that down yet. So let's write that out. Let's copy paste these lines in the if statement here, so we don't have to write them again. And we'll set the color to green. This is going to be the same. And instead of this string, we're going to write label. Now let's see what it does when we write the label of the GUI content here. So let's save the script and go back to Unity. And now you can see that it says element 0, element 1, element 2, and element 3. Now what I want for our beat pattern is to remove the word element and just display 0, 1, 2, 3. So let's see how we can do that. To do this, we need to replace everything inside of the string label that is not a number. And we can do this by using the regular expressions. So we're going to be using something else, and this is going to be system.text.regular expressions. Now above the GUI color, we're going to create a new string, and we'll call this string number. And that is going to be, and we're going to use the regular expression for this, so let's type regex dot replace. And here we can say what we want to replace. We want to replace label dot its text. Now we need to select a pattern and then what we want to replace it with. And we want to get everything that is not a number. So any spaces, any capitals, any lower cases. So what we can do here is type an add, and then we'll create a string, and we'll do a forward dash and a capital D. This is just how it works. And we'll replace that with nothing. So in between of parentheses, emptiness. Now instead of the label, we'll set the string number here. So let's save this script and go back to Unity. And now we can see just the numbers. Now let's set the width of this label rec to 20. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to check that if the length of the string in the array is not equal to the length of the pattern, which we say in the beat pattern as the pattern length. If this pattern length is not equal to the length of the label, we want to create a label that has that length full of zeros. Now to get the information from the beat pattern, we need to create that. And we can do this by typing beat pattern, and we'll call this BP. And we have to say attribute as beat pattern. And now we can access the values. So if we type BP dot, and we'll get the beat interval and the pattern length. Now let's create an if statement. So if the property dot its string value dot its length is not equal to BP dot pattern length, then we want to create a string of zeros with the length of that. And to create a string, we're going to use the string builder, and that is in the system.text. So let's type at the top using system.text. Now with that in place, we can create a new string builder. So let's type string builder, and we'll call this the start string, and that is going to be a new string builder. Now let's create a for loop with the length of pattern length and add a 0 to the string. So for int I is 0, I is less than the bp dot pattern length, I plus plus. Now we want to add a character to the start string, so we'll say start string dot append, and we want to add a character to the string, so we'll use the single parentheses, and that is going to be a 0. And now inside this editor we can actually set the property to this string value, so we can talk to property dot string value is going to be start string dot to string. Let's actually type a few comments here. So this is about setting the index number, and this is about setting the length of the string. Now this whole thing is only running when it's not equal to the string length. And now we need to create buttons for each of the element in the string. So let's create a new string builder. So we'll say string builder, and we'll call this SB for string builder. And that is a new string builder. And we'll give it a value of property dot string value. Now we're going to create a for loop for the length of the property dot string value. So let's create a for loop. Int I is 0, I is less than the property dot string value dot length, I plus plus. Now we're going to create a lot of buttons, but the buttons also need to have a rect for their position. So we need to calculate that. So we'll say rect, and we'll call this button rect, and that is going to be a new rect. And here we need to set the position in its x. So let's say position dot x, but this always starts at the start. So we already set the position of the label here at a length of 20. So we need to take that into account because we don't want to overlap this label of the index. So we're going to say plus 21. So we get 1 pixel of space in between of this one and this one. Now let's first type out the rest. So the position in its y is going to be position dot y. Now the width and the height of the button is going to be the width I'm going to set to 10, and the height is going to be 20. Now we are inside a for loop, and if we keep it like this, then all the buttons will be stacked upon each other. So we need to offset them. So let's offset them with 1 pixel more than the width of the button, which is 10 at this point. So we'll say plus between parentheses 11, which is 1 more, multiplied by its position in the loop. This will make sure that each button is next to each other. So let's first draw the buttons. So to draw a button, we have to do an if statement. And we'll say GUI.button. Here we need to get the button rect. And we'll say GUI content dot none. It's just a normal button. And let's keep this empty for now, so nothing will happen when we press the button. But let's save the script and see how it looks in Unity. And I can see that it's drawing all of the buttons. It's placing the index, and we can click the buttons, but they're all green now. And so we need to make the buttons work and give them some better coloring. So let's do that. So what I want to do is, if the character in the string is a 0, then I want to set the button to become black. If it's a 1, then I want it to become green. But also, let's go to the beat pattern. if the button that represents the character of the position in the string is equal to 0 with the modulo of this beat interval, then I want it to become red. So let's do that. So above this if statement, we're going to do some coloring. Let's call this coloring. So we can do an if statement on the string builder. String builders are very handy tools. So we can just say an array of its position, so it will get the position of the character. And if that character is equal to the character of 1, then we're going to say GUI.color is color.green. Now else is going to be black, but we also need to check on if it's the modulo of the beat interval. So let's first do the if statement of that. So if I modulo bp.beat interval is equal to 0, then we want to set the GUI.color to become color.red. And else we're going to set the GUI.color to become color.black. Let's check out what this looks like. So let's save this, go back to Unity. And now you can see that for each 8th the color is red and otherwise it's black. Now what we could easily do in the beat sequencer itself, we can set this for example to 4. If I change that, then the step size is 4, and for each 4th there will be a red marker. Now we can also change the size of this, so let's say 16, and then it automatically becomes 16. So let's set it back to 32 and 8. So now the final thing that we need to do is make these buttons work. So if we click them, they're going to be either 1 or 0. So if we click them and they're 0, they're going to be 1. If they're 1 and we click them, they're going to be 0. So in the if statement of the GUI.button, and this if statement actually says if we click the button, then do something. So we're going to check on the string builder whether it's a 0 or a 1. So if string builder of its current position is equal to the character 0, then the string builder of its current position is becoming 1. And the property must also change, so property.stringValue is becoming sb.toString. Now for the else, we're gonna do this, but we'll make this a 0. Let's save this script and see if everything works. Now once I click these buttons, they should appear green. And they appear green. And if I click them again, they disappear or become black again, or red. So now you can create some beat patterns. Now there is still something missing, and we can see that when we add another variable beneath this. So let's create a public bool test. Now you'll see that this color becomes the last color used in this pattern, because if I changed this one to green, this becomes green also. So to fix this, we're going to change the GUI.color to become color.white at the end of the script. Let's save that. And now that works. That's everything for this tutorial part. In the next part, we are going to convert the string into a set of booleans, so that we can actually use them as beat patterns and create behavior based on the patterns we create. The source of this tutorial is available for download for peer pressure patrons. As this is my first exclusive tutorial, I would appreciate some feedback from you if you like the subject and if you found it useful. Thank you for watching and have a creative day.